How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Hartman, joined as always by my good friend, my co-host from the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today?
I'm doing really well today, Jack. The NFL draft came and went, and it was an amazing draft. I love the NFL draft, man. Even in years where it feels like it's weaker and it feels like there's not star power at the top or that it's an amazing draft, it's still always fun. There are still always a bunch of trades. Doing the live stream with you was obviously a blast. We always have a bunch of fun with that. And that just being a yearly tradition for us, I think, is so fun. Even on other sides of the country, we should in future years hook up and do it together from where place it. I think that would be so much fun.
Yeah.
But the NFL draft was so much fun to be spending that first round with you. Happy with how my Steelers came away with things. I'm doing well. Just attended a wedding this last weekend from some close friends of mine. So was staying out late, having a really good time as of late. And just overall having a really good time, man. My Lakers did lose their series against the Thunder, getting swept. But I kind of expected that because Luka Doncic is not playing, and the Thunder are pretty good at basketball, if I do say so myself. And so is what it is. I hope we get some better finals games and Eastern and Western Conference finals games. And that will be amazing to get some good competitive basketball before we hit the summer and it drops into just like baseball season. And that's about it. Which there's nothing wrong with that. But summer does drag on. We're not quite there, though, yet. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Getting ready. We've got a youth retreat this weekend, so it's been, tying up the loose ends with that here over the last couple of weeks. But, really, really excited that we're getting to do that. So that's coming up here this weekend. And then getting into the summer, which is a little bit easier of a time for me. Just as busy, but different busy with deadlines that are farther apart. So instead of the weekly stuff, it's like bi-weekly stuff that's bigger than the stuff that's happening weekly, but also more of a runway to get that stuff figured out. So looking forward to that. And going to travel a little bit this summer. And so just looking forward to that, and to my wife being off of work for the summer. She is an elementary school teacher, and just life being a little calmer for us after a really, really busy year. So,
Jack, what are we talking about today? What are we doing the podcast on? Let the people know.
Yeah, we're almost a month later, it feels like, but we're talking about we each have a couple teams that we feel like improved over the draft, and we have a couple teams that we feel like did not get better. And I mean, it's hard to say that they got worse because they did acquire talent, but the talent that they acquired, we'll say that the talent that they acquired compared to others made them appear worse than other teams, even though they didn't actually get worse. I think that's sort of the best way to put it. And so we'll do what we always do, which is where we start positive and then we turn negative. And we'll start with our two teams that we were impressed by, and that we really liked their draft and view them as better teams because of it. And Nick, I'll let you get going with that.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So my first team I'm talking about, a couple years ago, very dysfunctional, first overall pick worthy types of teams. That will be the Carolina Panthers. They were awful Bryce Young's first year, second year. They really started going in the right direction. They obviously made the playoffs. They gave the Rams a game. I was really impressed with them giving the Rams a competitive football game in that playoff game in Wild Card weekend. They obviously lost. Their offensive line was banged up. They added Rasheed Walker to that offensive line in free agency. And then they proceeded to add Monroe Freeling in the draft in the first round. Freeling obviously was a riser late in the draft process. He's a big 6'7" offensive tackle out of Georgia. Those guys are going to go higher. Georgia, Alabama, LSU, those big teams, when you have big, strong offensive linemen that have played good competition, you're always going to have those guys rise up the board. And he rose up the board to where teams were talking about, oh, is he going to go number 6 to the Cleveland Browns? Is he going to go top 10? That kind of conversation. He didn't go top 10. He did go inside the top 20, though, to Carolina. I think they got good value for him. I really like how Carolina is prioritizing that offensive tackle position. Ike Ekwonu did hurt his knee in the playoffs. Taylor Moton is getting older. He's been very good for a long time, but he is getting older. And with the addition of Rasheed Walker on just a one-year deal, they got good value for him. They have 4 offensive tackles that, whether it's age, injury, contract, all of them have some sort of questions. But you have 4 dudes who can play pretty darn well at the offensive tackle spot. And I really prefer to have depth at that position if I'm a coach, if I'm a team. And they did a really good job with that. And so that first pick, good pick. But then you drop into their later picks, Lee Hunter in the second, to go along with their other good tackle, Derek Brown. Derek Brown's a great defensive tackle. Now you're going to have 2 huge bodies up the middle. They should be a great run-stopping team this year. And then you get into the mid-late rounds, and there are just a bunch of good players there. You look at it, you get Sam Hecht in the 5th, Chris Brazel in the 3rd, Zakee Wheatley in the 5th. Wheatley was a dude that people thought could go in the 2nd, late 2nd, 3rd potentially, and you get him in the 5th. He's a good safety. Hecht had injury issues, but he's a good center. You need some center depth after your center left this offseason. And then getting Brazel, who people thought, oh man, he's going to get overdrafted. He's a size speed type of dude. He's a Tennessee wide receiver. Oh, everybody hates Tennessee wide receivers because they all have those wide splits. They all end up on one side of the field and don't move around. Oh, man, they don't actually have good ball skills or good route skills. But I think getting him in the mid-3rd round is really solid value for a dude that when you're building around Bryce Young and they're trying to make Bryce Young look good, that you need big, massive targets because if he wants to see you over his offensive line, you need to be a big wide receiver who he's going to be able to hit you in your catch radius. And I think that adding another big wide receiver, even though all their wide receivers are kind of the same, where it's all 6'4", 6'5" dudes, I don't have a problem with it because they have a bunch of dudes who can catch passes who I think can play pretty darn well. And I think getting value deep into the draft for a team that is going in the right direction is just awesome for Carolina. So I'm going Carolina number 1.
Yeah, I think Carolina had a good draft, an above average draft. I wouldn't say it was great necessarily. I think my concern, a lot of people were thinking the Lions will take Monroe Freeling. I'm glad that they didn't. He is incredibly raw. He is not experienced. He only had 18 college starts. So I think if the Panthers feel like, hey, we've got some ramp up time before we're like competitive, and in the NFC South, that means you win the division at 8-9, before you're winning the division at 12-4 and competing for, home field advantage through the NFC Championship. If they feel like they can have time to let Freeling develop over the next couple of years, then I feel good about it. My concern, though, is I don't know if they have that with Bryce Young, right? Like, has he gotten better? Yes. Has he gotten better fast enough that you feel confident this can be our guy? We can sign him to that long-term, second contract. I don't know that they feel that. And I think that especially teams are going to be weary of doing that, looking at what just happened with Tua. Looking at the Kyler Murray and Arizona situation. And so if they do have time and if Bryce Young does continue to improve and they can pay him and he can play up to the level that they would pay him for, and Freeling can develop over the next couple seasons, I think it could be great. My concern is, and I think teams in general need to be thinking long-term more than they're thinking short-term. However, Carolina has been such a short-term team because of how quickly they've hired and fired head coaches and how little success they've had and how quickly sort of there's been roster and staff turnover, that this is a move that you make when you've got time. And I don't necessarily know that this crew has time with Monroe Freeling. That is, I agree with you about Chris Brazel. I think that's a really good pick. Carolina certainly hit with Tet McMillan last year, but the Xavier Legette pick is looking not great necessarily. Lee Hunter as well. Anybody from that Texas Tech defense that was coming out this year, is going to be really solid. So that was a good get. And I ditto what you said about some of those guys in the later end.
For sure. What's your first team that you just loved what they were doing?
Yeah, I've got to go with the New York Jets. I really, really liked what the Jets did. We went into, and we talked about this, after the first round. We went into the night thinking David Bailey or Arvell Reese, and then Omar Cooper Jr. was pretty much what we were thinking the Jets were going to do. They take Kenyon Sadiq at 16, and we're like, oh my gosh, why would they do that? Well, they trade back into the first round to get Omar Cooper Jr. And with that, you need to totally reframe how you're looking at what the Jets did night one, right? Because we were saying David Bailey or Arvell Reese and Omar Cooper Jr. They left with David Bailey, Omar Cooper Jr., and Kenyon Sadiq, which is just such a great move by them, getting skilled pass catchers that I really, really like. You also get Sadiq, a guy who has really great rapport with Dante Moore, who you might be drafting next year. And if so, that you like having that connection. So the Arvell Reese David Bailey thing, my thought was basically that the Jets would go with David Bailey because he's a proven commodity, more proven than Arvell Reese. Arvell Reese is the type of guy that, flashes, on paper, but he's, similar to what I was just talking about with Monroe Freeling, very raw, needs more experience and needs more coaching. After what we saw the Bengals do with Shamar Stewart last year, that would make me hesitant to go with Arvell Reese. I think we could be looking at this 10 years from now, and Reese is by far a better edge than David Bailey, but I think we'll see David Bailey be far better as an edge, as a true edge, the next 2 years, over Reese. That's sort of my analysis. That doesn't mean much because I'm just a guy on a podcast that we started on YouTube when we were in college, but still. So I really like the David Bailey pick, especially because of, the Jets needing to show some improvement here. And I think that, making a pick that will work best now, I think was the right call. So I loved what they did night one. On top of that, they got D'Angelo Pons, which I think was such a great pick by them. Is he undersized? Yes, but you look at the guys that he went up against this year, the receivers that he went up against this year, and just absolutely blanketed. I think that he will be a really good corner for the Jets here. I wouldn't put him on the same level as there's your Sauce Gardner replacement. One, just because of his skill set compared to Sauce Gardner's, but still, you got a guy who got interceptions, which the Jets didn't last year, and literally didn't. And you got a guy that is experienced and is capable of playing against bigger body types as well. Outside of that, personally, I also really like the Cade Klubnik pick. You get him in the fourth round, and by doing so, we can look at Cade Klubnik with the standard day 3 drafted quarterback, which everyone needs to remember that, especially after Shedeur Sanders was a day 3 guy the previous year, and the way that people want to treat day 3 quarterbacks when it's Shedeur Sanders, no, okay, let's put our focus on day 3 quarterback. What does that look like? As a day 3 quarterback, I like taking Cade Klubnik. There's a chance that maybe he sees the field a little bit this year, and you see what you have with him. And, who knows? Maybe he's a diamond in the rough. That means that you can, your draft assets that you have next year, you don't need to use all of them to go up and get Arch Manning, Dante Moore, somebody else. You can, hang tight a little bit and wait for the following year when some of these other guys might come out. I think it was a wise pick to take a quarterback and to take one that, if we're thinking about it, before the season started, we were thinking might be a first round pick, right? That was the consensus with Cade Klubnik. There was a lot of stuff that went wrong at Clemson last year. Cade was some of it, but he wasn't all of it. Their offensive line was horrendous last year at Clemson, which is shocking for a Dabo Swinney-led Clemson team. So I think that they did the right jobs, taking a flyer on him and kicking the tires with him at pick number 110 overall. And I think that they drafted needs well. and didn't draft places where they were like really good. Like they didn't take a tackle, they shouldn't have. They've invested a lot in tackle, and they did, like it's hard to be like give them their flowers for not making a dumb decision, but also it's the Jets and they tend to do that. So I like the Jets. I think the Jets certainly got better from before the draft, and I think that they also are far better set up for the future based on who they picked here in round one and the whole draft.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree with you. I think this was a good Jets draft. Based on the way that they've torn it down the last couple of years, I think that it will be really hard to be a bad draft in a way. Because if we're talking about this team, like what positions were they not allowed to take? Like offensive tackle, like you're saying. But besides that, the cupboard's pretty darn bare. Like they could have drafted a safety, a corner, an edge, a defensive tackle, a wide receiver, a tight end. Maybe a running back would have been weird, but I would have been fine with a mid-round running back potentially. Like a fourth-round running back would have been okay. But I just feel like the cupboard was so bare since they traded away Quinnen Williams, since they traded away Sauce Gardner, that they could have gone anywhere. I think they honestly could have gone with any position, and as long as you're not reaching. And they didn't really get reachy this draft at all. Kenyon Sadiq was right around where he should have been. Bailey was right around where he should have been. Omar Cooper wasn't a reach. He was a falling star that you caught. And so I do agree with you. Pons, I don't think was a reach either. I just think that it was really good value across the board for good players. And that's how you get a good draft. The Jets have had good drafts the last couple of years, but they have missed on the quarterback position and had some injury issues with offensive tackle. That's been the main issue with the Jets. And if they can stay healthy at tackle, I think they could be pretty solid this year. If they could get some solid, consistent coaching, I think they could be good. I really like D'Angelo Pons under this head coach, who was a small corner when he was playing in Aaron Glenn. He was a really good player who knew how to cover dudes and be physical at a shorter stature. That really matters to have a head coach who relates to you, who wants you to succeed when you're a player who doesn't necessarily have all the physical tools. And he does have physical tools. Pons is really fast and really explosive. He's just tiny. That's the only thing. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. I think this was a good draft. The only thing that I would probably say about it is maybe I would have went with like a guard at some point in the mid rounds, just because I think that the Jets need a lot of offensive line depth because they always get injured. And tackle, you have really good players there, so I probably wouldn't lean with tackle. But what they have at guard right now, Dylan Parham, Joe Tippmann, Josh Myers for their three interior starting spots. Then after that, you have Landon Young, Xavier Newman, Inez Cooper. Like those guys just aren't as good interior backup dudes as I would like to have. It's not a massive deal because they got really good players, but I'd just be worried that a Geno Smith, who with good offensive tackles can play better, but if one of them goes down, like you could have a terrible offensive line again, and I'd be worried about that. But I agree with you. Jets had a good draft for sure.
Cool. Who do you have next?
Next up, I got the Patriots. The Patriots, they are a good team that obviously overachieved this last year. We're not going to get that twisted. That team, to be able to make a Super Bowl, they did not win the Super Bowl, but to make it, I think that it was awesome to see Drake May progress the way he did. I think that it was awesome to see the offensive line kind of come together and play better than they looked like on paper up until the Super Bowl. I think that with the receiver core they had playing as well as they did was really impressive. But when I look at this draft, Caleb Lomu, good pick at 28, good value, investing in that offensive tackle position, whether it's kicking Will Campbell into guard or because Morgan Moses is as old as Moses. I think that having that extra offensive tackle is really valuable. Lomu could be their left tackle of the future. Gabe Akis out of Illinois, I really like as a player, as a bigger, stronger edge rusher. The Patriots have always liked their bigger, stronger edge rushers to be able to push the pocket from the outside, and I think he was good value. Eli Raridon, I really, really love him as a tight end. This tight end class was filled with a bunch of like 6'3", 6'4" ish tight ends. Raritan is big at 6'6" and can fill out his frame to become a true tight end that somebody like maybe a Hunter Henry has only been for this Patriots team since Gronk. I just believe that Raritan could actually be a diamond in the roughs. Notre Dame develops their tight ends really, really well. They know how to block just like an Iowa tight end. I just think that he could be a steal in this draft, where tight ends normally in the second, third, fourth round, that's where you get great ones. It's not normally in the first. I think Raritan could be a great player. Crown over in the sixth at offensive tackle, I think, is fun value. Jam Miller in the seventh at running back, I think he could be a contributor. Baron Morton in the seventh, I think he could be sort of that Joe Milton type that he gets some playing time and you trade him for a fifth or a sixth round pick, and then you feel good about that, because flipping a seventh into a pick after that, I think, is really good. So I just feel like down the board, they got good players, and up at the top, they got core contributors and dudes on the defensive line, dudes on the offensive line, and dudes that are going to be players for you deep into Drake May's career. So I really feel good about this Patriots draft.
Yeah, I'm not as in love with it as you are. I certainly agree with everything you said about Eli Raridan, and Gabe Akis. The Lomu pick is interesting, and I feel like this is one of the things that everyone loved about both the Utah offensive linemen that went in the first round was their versatility. It's like, yes. However, when you're at the NFL level, do you really want to prioritize a guy who is not great as one thing but good as three things? Or do you want to prioritize a guy who's great as one thing? And if you're going to invest a first round pick into a guy, I'd want to get a guy who can be great, who can be like potentially be all pro at one of the positions on the offensive line. I'm just not sure that I see that out of Lomu, so that gives me a little bit of hesitancy there, though you did address the offensive line, which is what you needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
We said before the draft, we talked about the AJ Brown situation, and I said that because the Eagles are going to deal him after June 1st, and it's sort of unanimously understood that that is going to be to the Patriots, it's okay that the Patriots don't prioritize a wide receiver early in the draft. However, I did not say that they could not draft a wide receiver, and they never drafted a wide receiver. We talked about time and time again the depth at wide receiver in this draft. I don't understand never taking one. I do not understand that. I cannot get on board with that. They made some picks that I thought they, doubled up on a couple positions that was a little surprising. So they doubled up on offensive tackle with Lomu and then Demetrius Crownover out of A&M later. You already have Will Campbell. You mentioned having Morgan Moses. Tackle is not the only spot on their offensive line that needs help. I would have liked to see them maybe get an interior offensive lineman if they were going to take a second one, unless they plan that Lomu is going to play guard. That could work. They also took two edges in Akis, and then with their last pick, Quintavious Hutchins. On the one hand, you can't have too many edges, and on the other hand, you can absolutely have too many edges. So, and again, that's following up off of the wide receiver comment, right? Really, so yeah. So again, I don't hate this draft. I don't love it, though. I don't view this Patriots team as, man, they overachieved getting to the Super Bowl last year, and they just had a draft that they can absolutely propel them to get back there. I think they had a draft that if they got back there again this next year, we would maybe lean more in the camp of they overachieved than the New England Patriots are back to what we experienced for all of the 2000s and most of the 2010s. That's sort of my angle about the Patriots draft.
Yep, I get you there. I just think that the Patriots, they're one of those teams that the Seahawks, when they won the Super Bowl this last year, we looked at them and we're like, wow, they have no holes. Like they need one guard spot, running back because of weird injury free agency stuff that happened. And then like nothing. Like they got corners, they got safeties, they got tackles, they got wide receivers. Like they had everything covered. The Patriots, it's like, okay, they have quarterback, they have defensive tackle, they have like two corners that you like. But it's like, could they use another safety or a star safety? Yeah. Could they use another edge? Yes. Could they use a really good linebacker? Yeah. Running back, maybe in the mid rounds. Like it feels like there were a lot of holes on this Patriots team that because they overachieved, like folks weren't recognizing, wow, like this team has a lot of holes that they need to draft. And I think this was a meat and potatoes draft that when you have as many holes that you do, going with the trenches and not overdrafting is how you do it. Like if I'm a team that has a bunch of holes, I'm just going to go O-line, D-line, a lot. And then, okay, my team's better now. Okay, we need a corner. We need an edge rusher. We need a running back. And then you get picky. But I just don't think the Patriots were good enough to say we really need to prioritize that. I also feel that because they didn't have a fourth round pick, that would have been where the wide receiver was at. Like their pick, they could have had Bryce Lance if they kept their fourth round pick. And I think Bryce Lance would have been a perfect deep ball catcher with Drake May. And so I think that was probably the struggle where you get deep into the draft, getting Bryce Lance, you feel amazing. That's what you're talking about, how this draft is deep with wide receivers. But he was gone by their fifth round pick, and they weren't taking him with their third because they took Raritan because they wanted to prioritize somebody who can do multiple things, which they got in Raritan. So I don't really blame them in that spot, but I do agree with you. Getting wide receiver would have been nice later in the draft. But A.J. Brown is on his way. It feels like it's inevitable at this point. If he doesn't, we'll be shocked.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Okay. Before I say my final of my other one that I'm like really happy about, that's not what I mean. Other team that I think improved really well. There are a couple things that I feel like are teams that don't even necessarily deserve honorable mentions, but hey, here's this team, but also here's the massive hole that makes it hard to, say this about them. The Cowboys had a good first day of the draft. What they did after that was decent. They took Jayshon Barham out of Michigan. They took an offensive tackle with Drew Shelton and depth, yes, but also, you needed to give this defense, and the new defensive coordinator, Christian Parker, a lot of help. So, I don't know about that. You think about the Chiefs, who I think if you just look at who the Chiefs selected and how they slot into their depth chart, I think the Chiefs made some really great picks. However, the trade for Mansour Delane just made no sense. So it's hard to and what they gave up to do that. So it's hard to really look at them. The Dolphins made lots of picks, and a lot of them were good. However, they drafted 3 linebackers in the first 4 rounds. I understand that you just need guys, especially looking at that roster, but also can we maybe, spread the love out a little bit? They took 3 wide receivers, and again, a lot of these guys that the Dolphins took, I like. Caden Proctor, I think, can be good. Chris Johnson out of San Diego State, I think, was drafted a little too high, but I do think he will be a solid corner. I love Jacob Rodriguez. I love Chris Bell out of Louisville. So they got guys that it's like, hey, you got good dudes. It's just also you took a lot, and I feel like maybe 7 of the 13, it's like this was a really solid pick and one that makes sense, and the others are kind of head scratchers. So, saying all of that, the other team that I think genuinely got a lot better with what they did, and on the one hand, this is kind of low-hanging fruit, but I think it's just really when you really look at it, it's obvious, and that's the Las Vegas Raiders. of course, Fernando Mendoza, right? We're not even going to talk about that, obviously. But you look at what else they did. Traden Stukes out of Arizona was a really good pick. They were able to also then get Jermon McCoy in round 4, which there must be, I mean, he must like just not have ligaments in his knee anymore, but is also somehow still able to run like a 4.3 something 40 at the pro day. There's a lot that I don't understand about why he fell so far, because he seemed plenty healthy at the pro day. Um, but when you're sitting there at pick 101 and a guy who, if he was not hurt, was likely going to be a top 10 pick in the draft and top corner in the draft, and you get him at pick 101, that's just amazing, right? But some of these other guys, Trey Zune out of Texas A&M at guard, I like that pick. I like the Kieron Crawford pick out of Auburn at edge. Mike Washington Jr. was one of the few running backs that people are like, no, this is going to be a solid pick for this team. Yes, they just took Ashton Genty, but I think between all of the hits that Ashton Genty took last year, compared to just still a little bit of concern about this offensive line, I like having another running back that can spare him a little bit. So I really like the Raiders draft. I think that they drafted in the appropriate places. I think they got guys that certainly help make this team better, and I think they really utilized all 10 of their picks, I feel like. And there aren't any of their picks that I'm like, why do that, right? Like, they get yes, they took 3 defensive backs between Stukes, McCoy, and then Hezekiah Massis out of Cal, but Stukes has experienced all over the defense, and if McCoy is healthy, then he's absolutely worth taking him there. And you can always have more corners, so like I don't view them taking, 2 corners, 1 defensive back, and 1 true safety, Dalton Johnson out of Arizona. I don't view that as like, oh man, because also anybody could throw on this team, like I just think that they did a really good job making appropriate picks to make their team better and utilizing the picks that they had.
Mm-hmm. For sure. This Raiders draft was pretty darn good. And it's a lot easier to have a good draft when you have the number 1 overall pick. Like, you're going to feel a lot better when you plug in the best quarterback in the entire draft. You just feel good about it. Outside of that, though, McCoy, like you're saying, Stukes, add those guys into Stokes, who played really well last year at corner. I think you got 3 dudes who you can put outside, and in the slot, and it just fits perfectly as long as the health's good, which is a question, obviously, with Stokes and with McCoy. I think that you could have 3 dudes who can all cover really well, and I think that having Mad Max and adding a complementary pass rusher in, I think that this pass rush and this pass defense could be pretty darn good. Mike Washington, I think, as a big, fast dude who can just run downhill, is going to be able to spell Ashton Genty pretty darn well, too. My big issue, though, with this Raiders draft, you've talked about it extensively, talking about how deep the wide receivers are in this draft. And they waited until the 6th round to draft Benson out of Oregon. I just think for this Raiders team where Fernando Mendoza was the number 1 pick, obviously you knew you were going to pick him. When Omar Cooper slides to the late first round pick into the late first round, I think that you got to trade up to get him. At 30s, where he went to the Jets traded up for him, obviously. But I think that the moment you see him there, you start thinking, okay, let's go get our guy. And this Raiders team needs wide receivers. Brock Bowers is a really great tight end. Obviously, he had an incredible rookie year, still a good second year. But I think that if you could have traded up, gotten Omar Cooper for 1 wide receiver, Elijah Surratt slid all the way to the 4th. I think you could have drafted him in the 4th and then gone Omar Cooper, Elijah Surratt. You immediately have chemistry with our rookie quarterback and your good players, and it's good value. Surratt went later than people thought. Cooper went later than people thought. I just think that when the value and the position and the chemistry line up, why don't you do that? And they chose to not do that. And that just confused me. Even though they got good players, even though they got good value for what they did do, when you could get value position of need, and chemistry. That's just a way bigger deal to me than what they did get. And so I'm kind of disappointed in that. But if their board looked different, if they had Omar Cooper and Elijah Surratt lower on the board than the players they did pick, that's their prerogative. It's just from an outsider looking in from the draft community, it was just a little surprising for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right, Nick. Team that you were not high on. Again, they didn't necessarily get worse because they did get more talent, but compared to, the other teams, their acquiring of new talent was worse than everyone else.
For sure. My first team's got to be Arizona. I just think that when you make a decision, the decision can't be bad on multiple fronts, even if it's good on one front. The pick to draft Jeremiah Love was good on one front. That one front is he's an amazing player and he's really good at football. But the two negative fronts, you gave up the number 3 overall pick, not a third rounder, not a regular first rounder, the number 3 overall pick. That's a very valuable pick in a draft where it had good edge rushers and really good players up inside that top 5. But after that, it kind of fell off. And you chose to draft a running back there. The other big issue, he is currently getting paid on average over $14 million a year as a rookie running back. That is unheard of. Even Saquon Barkley back in 2018 when he got drafted number 2 overall, Saquon was a better prospect than Jeremiah Love. Let's not get that twisted. Saquon Barkley coming out of Penn State looked like he should be ready to get fitted for a gold jacket in Canton. He was that good. He was incredible at Penn State, and he was a great player on the Giants when he wasn't injured behind an awful offensive line. Jeremiah Love isn't that. He's a really good player. He's a great running back. But to pay him and pay the draft pick to get him is just insane. I know that was their guy and that they tried to trade down supposedly, but weren't able to finagle a deal. I think that the moment that Arvell Reese doesn't go too, that somebody would trade up for Arvell Reese. I just think maybe it was outside of the top 10 and they didn't want to go outside of the top 10 because maybe then they don't get Jeremiah Love. But when you're stepping over the opportunity to get great defensive players for a running back, giving up a great pick and an amazing contract for a running back, I just think that that's a whack decision. Basantis is a good guard they got in the second. But after that, Carson Beck in the third, early third, 65 overall. And then you get into the later picks, and it's just not massive contributors at this point. I think that this Cardinals team is in pretty prime position to get a top 3 pick again next year. I think that the folks that are saying they are the prime candidate for the Arch sweepstakes, if it's not the Dolphins, I think they're right. I just think that this Cardinals team could be pretty disastrous this year, even though they have weapons in Love, in the tight end, in Marvin Harrison Jr., who could get better, in Michael Wilson, who played really well late in the year. They have weapons, but you're banking on either an older Jacoby Brissett, who's had injury issues, who's been a backup, or young Carson Beck, who has been very disappointing in his college career. I just think that it was just really questionable decision-making from a first-time head coach in Mike LaFleur.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. The Jeremiah Love pick was, I was very adamant about how bad of a pick I thought that was. If you're a running back away, then okay, do it, pay him that money. Arizona is far from a running back away, and you just signed on to pay him all of that money. You don't have anybody scary in your front 7 on defense. And like we talked about, Arvell Reese was available. You have massive concerns on your offensive line. Like, really, Trey McBride is the only spot that you're like, this is a guy that, you need to circle on the scouting report to be concerned about on the offense. And I understand now you have Jeremiah Love, and that's another one. But, again, you can get running backs for, pennies on the dollar nowadays, and especially in the draft. And that just wasn't the move, and I feel like that definitely set them up for a lot of other things that it was like, why? Um, I'm not going to talk about that team, even though I think it's worth talking about. One of my two teams, and I'm like really not impressed with what they did, is the San Francisco 49ers. So the San Francisco 49ers, they traded back in the first round twice to end up with the first pick on day 2. And despite there being some seriously high caliber wide receivers that we thought, oh, they might be a first round pick that kind of fell out of it. The 49ers went with Dejon Stribling out of Ole Miss with the first pick. Very surprising pick. They took Romello Height, which I mentioned, those Texas Tech defenders, I think, is a safe bet, except Romello Height was playing opposite David Bailey. And that's obviously going to inflate his potential. Kalen Black out of Indiana is, solid. But also, your highest need, I don't necessarily think so. Grayson Halton out of Oklahoma, Carver Willis out of Washington, Ephesians Prysock out of Washington, Jaden Duggar out of Louisiana, Enrique Cruz out of Kansas. Just a lot of guys that it's like, when you took that guy, there were better people at that position available if you wanted to take that position at that pick. I feel like with basically all of them. We've talked for a while now about the importance of them getting a, big named offensive tackle, a high caliber prospect offensive tackle, because Trent Williams just doesn't have, the waters of life to keep playing for forever. The only time that you address tackles with Enrique Cruz in round 5. I think Cruz is an okay player. He was at Syracuse before he was at Kansas, and I think he's decent, but you're not gonna take him in the 5th round and be like, hey, this is the guy who's gonna follow up a guy like Trent Williams. It just felt like, and I feel like this is the case with the 49ers every year, is they just, for whatever reason, have this idea in mind of like very specific things that they're looking for in players, and it's things that no one else is looking for. And because of that, like, that's how it feels, right? Like, Denzel Boston was still available when they took Dejon Stribling. Like, I don't think anyone outside of San Francisco likely had Stribling above Boston on their big board, so I just, it was a very, very confusing draft. It was a very 49ers draft where, like, oh, we see this and we think that this is really good, and no one else sees it, but we're just so much smarter than you that we see it type feeling. And, if you look at what they did or what they have done in years past, like, how much has it really paid off? Like, Ricky Pearsall is fine, but not great. They took one of the edges out of Georgia last year, that there were some question marks about. He didn't have a real eye-opening season last year, so it just, when right now San Francisco is the 3rd best team in their division. You had the Seahawks win the Super Bowl last year, and what we said about the Seahawks that was important was getting a running back to replace Kenneth Walker and addressing the secondary, because you lost a couple guys in the secondary, and they absolutely did that. They took Jadarian Price in the 1st round. A lot of people thought it was an overdraft. You and I were calling that for months, though. It's what they should do, because outside of that, who is a top running back in this draft? They take Bud Clark out of TCU. They take Julian Neal out of Arkansas, and they take Michael Dansby out of Arizona to address their DBs. Oh, and Andre Fuller out of Toledo. And Toledo defensive backs are just really good. It's like the sneaky DBU of the Midwest, So they had a really good draft. The Rams are certainly better than you, and the Ty Simpson pick was head scratching. But at the same time, they made some picks that it's like, okay, and I have more trust and more faith in McVay than I do Shanahan, because McVay has at least put it together to win a Super Bowl. So I think that if you're San Francisco, you needed to do something really special to get up over the hump against the other two teams in your division that are ahead of you, and I don't think they did. And because of that, I really do not value the San Francisco draft.
Mm-hmm. I get you there. San Francisco makes a lot of weird picks, especially early into the mid rounds. I was just going to bring up the draft right now, just the last 5 years of early round picks for them. We look at it, it's so much weird stuff. This year, DeJon Stribling, Romello Height, and then Kalon Black in the third. Weird. Last year, Michael Williams in the first. Alfred Collins. Nick Martin. Then the year before, Ricky Pearsall, injury issues, inconsistency. Renardo Green, been solid, not great. Dominic Puny. The year before, their first 3 picks, Jair Brown, the safety. Jake Moody, the kicker, bad pick. Cameron Latu, the tight end, not a good pick. The year before that, Drake Jackson in the second round, not a good pick. Tyrion Davis-Price, another running back in the mid-rounds, not a good pick. Danny Gray in the third, not a good pick. The year before that, Trey Lance, awful pick. Aaron Banks, mediocre pick. Trey Sermon, another mid-round pick lit on fire. The year before that, Javon Kinlaw, Brandon Ayuk. Kinlaw, inconsistency, injury issues. Ayuk was good for a hot second, and then, he's damn near out of the league now. You can go back through the last 5 or 6 drafts, and it's a bunch of question marks. And it makes me look at, how did this 49ers team get this good and stay this good where they made the playoffs this year when they've been drafting insane? They've just been nuts in the way they've been drafting, and it's worked out okay in the result. But, man, the process and the players are weird, man. I couldn't agree with you more. This was a weird draft, which is a standard for the Kyle Shanahan 49ers at this point.
Yep. Nick, who's your final team that you're about?
My final team, the Houston Texans. Caden McDonald in the second round. Great pick. Got that pick from Washington because they traded away Laramie Tunsil to Washington. Caden McDonald, I think, can be a great player for you, a great run stopper, and you add him onto that D-line. But besides that, the process for the rest of the picks are all weird as heck again. I'm just bringing up the draft again. We got Houston. First off, Keelan Rutledge in the first round. One, it's an overdraft. Keelan Rutledge, people predicted, man, could he go as high as the early second round? He didn't go early second. He went late first. Not only that, the Houston Texans traded up to get him. And if you're saying, oh, did they trade up from the mid-second round to be able to get their dude because they wanted to jump up to get him? No, they made a small trade in the first round because they wanted to secure their offensive guard that was going to be there when they picked anyway. And they probably could have traded back and still gotten him, or just gotten him with the pick they got Caden McDonald at in the second. Weird. Marlon Klein, there was the massive run on tight ends this year in the mid-rounds, and so many tight ends got drafted, so many blocking tight ends because of the rise of 13 personnel. Obviously, the Rams and Sean McVay, 13 personnel rose up. But Marlon Klein in the late second round, a Michigan tight end that Loveland's been the only good Michigan tight end. Well, not only him. There's also the Seahawks dude who I like as well. But, man, drafting a tight end in the second round when there were other better, in my opinion, tight ends available, when your offense, obviously it needs a lot of help, but tight end I don't think is the spot that you need to go immediately. I think that more offensive line, more wide receiver would be better because this wide receiver core has been really questionable with injury issues. They go Fabechi Nuawu in the fourth round. I think there were better players available. And then through the rest of the entire draft, Aiden Fisher in the seventh is solid. Kamari Ramsey in the fifth is good. But man, I think they could have drafted better for the offensive line. They obviously drafted Keelan Rutledge in the first, but that's another weird Texans offensive line pick. And then they didn't draft wide receiver until Lewis Bond in the sixth. And I think they needed a receiver earlier who was a better separator. I just think that the process was really strange, and they really need to inject some life into an offense that's been going on the downslope since rookie CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud needs more receivers who can separate in a better offensive line, and Rutledge potentially could help, but the process I just didn't like with that. All things considered, I just not a big fan of what the Texans needed to do and what they did.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what did we say about Houston before the draft? We said that we really don't know if CJ Stroud is the quarterback of the future. And the reason that we don't know is because he hasn't, outside of year one, hasn't been able to stay upright behind the line of scrimmage and have healthy receivers to throw to. And so you can't make a decision about CJ Stroud until you give him the opportunity to play on his feet in the pocket, because you keep him upright. If in doing so the turnovers show up, then you know what you have with CJ Stroud. But you need to address the offensive line so you can keep him upright. And their addressing of the offensive line was horrendous. Keelan Rutledge, you take in the first round at pick number 26. So you took a backup guard at pick 26, unless you're planning to make him play center, which he took some reps at center in the Senior Bowl. Okay, who is taking a center in the first round? Who's taking a true center in the first round? That's not what you do. So that was just poor. And like you said, they traded up to do it. They could have traded back. They could have gotten him. They could have not even moved at all, and they could have taken somebody else in the first round and gotten him at pick 36. Like, it just did not make any sense. They really overhauled their tackle room this offseason, and then they didn't even draft an offensive tackle. Like, yeah, it's bad. It's bad. And we're going to leave this next season. Houston will probably make the playoffs, may win a game, may not. And we'll be sitting here again going, it's hard to say what Houston has because we don't know how good CJ Stroud is because he was sacked so many times. And that'll be that, and there's nothing we can say other than that. And there's nothing they can say because they're not giving him a chance to play upright, it's bad. So totally agree with you there. My last team that I'm like, what on earth, why, is the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars do not have a first-round pick. They traded it away when they moved up last year to get Travis Hunter. So their first pick came round 2, pick number 56, and they took Nate Borkercher out of Texas A&M, a blocking tight end, like exclusively a blocking tight end, at pick number 56. The only pick that they made that I'm like, nice, that was a good pick, was taking Emmanuel Pregnon at pick number 88 in the third round. Frankly, I would have taken Pregnon before I took Keelan Rutledge. So the fact that you got him as late as you did was a really, really good pick by them. However, sort of the consensus, this is the thing that Jacksonville needs to address, was edge and linebacker. They took one. They did take an edge in round 4 with Wesley Williams out of Duke, but otherwise they didn't address linebacker until Parker Hughes out of Middle Tennessee in the 7th round. When you have these draft picks that they do because you trade away a first, you kind of need to play Moneyball with your draft picks. But the way that playing Moneyball works is that you get guys that actually work. I mean, we'll see, but I don't know. I don't see how you're playing Moneyball when you take a exclusively blocking tight end with your first pick that you have in the draft, and it's pick number 56. I don't like that. Again, the Pregnon pick I thought was a really, really solid pick. Outside of that, I'm looking at this. Josh Cameron I think was a good pick, wide receiver out of Baylor. In 2024, he was a All Big 12 player as a punt returner, and then this last year he also received that honor as a true receiver. And he scored 19 receiving touchdowns over the past 2 seasons. I think that was a solid pick, especially considering some of the concerns that I feel like Jacksonville has or should have at wide receiver. I'm not sure I see a wide receiver one. I see a lot of wide receiver twos type thing, especially with the regression of Brian Thomas Jr. last year. Okay. But still, like, this just wasn't good. Like, it wasn't similar to what you were saying about, or what I was saying about New England. Like, this was a team that overachieved last year, and I don't feel like they made picks to solidify where they are, so that when they step back a little bit, it's only a short step back instead of a long drop,
Right.
So, yeah, Jacksonville, not a good draft.
Right. Looking at this draft, I agree with you. I think that they overdrafted basically everybody outside of Emmanuel Pregnon, who was a faller. Many folks thought he'd go within the top 50 picks. He did not. So I think getting him where you got him was good. But I think the fact that he did fall as far as he did does raise some questions. Were there health concerns or off the field or something? We don't know what, but that's a thought. My only way I can rationalize this draft is just that they wanted to change their scheme and wanted to get dudes for that scheme change. Or I think Pregnon being a primarily big body blocker, Borkircher being a blocker, Tanner Koziel they drafted in the 5th being a blocker. I think that the 3 tight end, big physical offensive line plan is because they want to run the ball more. And I think that the way that they're trying to go about it was just basically flooding a bunch of assets into that. Kind of similar to the Packers when they got LaFleur early on, where they drafted 2 tight ends in the mid rounds and a lot of offensive line and running back sort of assets in there. I just think that the way they went about it was similar to the way the Packers did, which was reaching on players just because you want to change the way you're going about your scheme. And I think if you're looking for particular scheme fit players, you can let them fall into your lap and just take really good players at positions of need anyway. Because I think this is a team that, as we both said, overachieved, and that they have positions that you could go towards. Like we said, linebacker, big needs. Edge rusher, they need an edge rusher 3. I think that they could use a DB across the board. I think that getting Pregnon helps with the depth there. I just think that, like you were saying, the way they went about reaching at positions was just really bad process, even though we can try and rationalize it with the scheme and coaching change from last year.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, when I look at all of the AFC South teams, I don't think any of them had a good draft. Like, Indianapolis and Tennessee, there are more things that you can pull out and like about it than Jacksonville and Houston. But even still, like, they weren't good. So I guess that's the one saving grace that you could give Jacksonville, is none of your counterparts that are competing for the same playoff spot did anything to make them that much better. So, you might be off the hook for this year at least. You might be able to win 10 games and still win your division and host a playoff game. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens there for sure. All right, everybody. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in, spending your time listening to us, coming back here from our break over the last couple weeks. And yeah, we are in the summer, which means we're going to need to work harder to find things to talk about. But also, June 1st is only a couple weeks away, and we'll see what happens there, and guys that get cut and traded after that point, and what happens with them, as well as getting into some of the rookie mini camps and stuff like that, and the news that will come out of there as well. Until next time, thank you again so much for watching, and we will talk to you later.